potential wage improvement in the medium to long term. But what does this really mean for workers, businesses, and the broader economy?
Now, stay with us as we analyze the numbers and explore the implications. This is Beyond the Numbers, where we go beyond the headlines to bring you the bigger picture. My name is Winston Taki, and with my co-pilot,
my name is Isaac Ofeja. Now, even before we go to the smart wall, we want to hear from the president first, who has been assuring Labour that, look, wait, when the times are better, we surely will come your way with an improved offer. Let's hear from the president as he gives Labour that sort of assurance.
Comrades, you know we are your natural allies, and we've worked together for many years. One thing that is a cardinal principle for us is to tell the truth at all times. We all knew the economy was in crisis, but some of the things I'm discovering myself, it's been a criminal handling of our economy. And Ghana is a crime scene, actually, because how a government can have been so reckless, I cannot understand. But we're faced with a reality, and our options are very few. We can behave like the ostrich and hide our heads in the sand and let the economy crash. But then what effect would it have on Ghanaian households and everybody? And so I've told him, I said, cut expenditure as much as you like. Even we ourselves in Office of Government Machinery, cut as much of our budget as you like, because we all must make those sacrifices. A certain distrust of the political class has arisen, because it's like when everybody else is tightening their belts, the political class is loosening its belts. But I want to assure you that we're all going to tighten our belts, and there will be no wasteful expenditure. It is said that we create and share. And so let's start cooking the meal now so that we can share when we have created. But right now, the meal is not only insufficient, the cooking pot is even leaking. And so I'll just appeal to you that let's temper our demands for this year. And once we get out of the woods, we've set good targets to bring inflation down so that the cost of everything will come down. We've set targets to grow the economy, to make things better.
So the president has spoken. He's calling for tightening of our belt. He has also said the criminal handling of the economy, and also the port is currently leaking, and therefore they need time to reset the economy. The last time I heard about tightening, belt tightening, or let's say burden sharing was when the former finance minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, said before we went into the DAP, including the IMF program. That
you mean the last time you heard burden sharing came with haircuts, right?
Yes, it came with haircut. This time the haircut gave people serious sakura. But here we are now, where the president is reiterating the fact that Labour should take it easy on the government. We're waiting to see what sort of stuff the president will unfold during the State of the Nation's address, especially based on the state of the economy that has been handed over to him.
Well, whether the pot is leaking, whether the economy is just left with the bones, what all employers must know is that you cannot employ a worker and at the end of the month pay them less than 500 cedis, 98 pesos. Now, 598 cedis, 95 pesos. So this is the minimum salary that any worker, whether in the public sector or in the private sector, should earn. So if you are an employer and you are paying anybody below, let's say 400 cedis, 300 cedis, or 500 cedis, you should know that this is illegal. And when the adjustment actually starts, you need to, also adjust. Now, tonight, we are here to
before we even get you said something that this is illegal.
Yeah.
Who is going to catch that person?
I mean, if the employee reports, it is also illegal. Legal actions can be taken against that employer. But tonight, what we want to discuss is the inside story. Why Labour actually decided to accept, the current minimum wage of 19 cedis, almost 20 cedis. this has been the story so far. So, Winston, I want you to take us through how minimum wage itself has been increasing from 2012 to 2025, and then we'll follow with the insider story.
So, labor's minimum wage is supposed to be the minimum amount of money that must be paid every worker. It is interesting, the adjustment over the years has been quite astronomical. We've seen from 2020 to 2012, it was 4 cities, 48 pesos, and it increased in 2015 to 7 cedi. There has been constant adjustment as an average of about 5% from there. But in 2018, it rose from 8 cedis, 80 pesos to 9 cedis, 69 pesos. Although those periods where we experienced COVID in 2022, 2022, it appeared that the minimum wage has seen astronomical adjustments. So we have been moving on incremental basis. And if you look at the figures that you were seeing there, the trend somehow aligns with the increase in inflation. We saw in 2020, 2023, the high inflation figures that we experienced, the inflation high rising to about 54%. But the interesting dynamics tells you that labor demands based on the cost of living, based on the change in economic conditions, and this makes it quite critical as to where 2025 is now hitting around 90 cedis, 97 pesos. The always critical or constant phrase from labor is that enough is not enough.
Well, so I mean, this has been the trend so far,
Yes.
and if you watch this graph, what you realize is the uniform change in minimum wage until 2024, where you can see that there's a big difference between how it jumped between 2023 and 2024.
Yeah.
If you check that between the uniform increments we've seen over the years, you can definitely see that
The
what
gap was
happened
wide. The
what
gap
happened
was
in
wide.
2024, between 2024 and 2023 was just an outlier. Now, we need to tell our
Before
viewers,
you come there, it appears, let's look at the election years.
Yeah.
Election year adjustment always seems to be quite interesting.
Exactly.
Because in 2023, from 13 to 14 cities was quite, those periods was quite more, but from, let's say, 14 cities, 14 to 18, about 4 Ghana cities increment was quite
Really,
wide.
yeah.
So it depends on the labor's ability to negotiate with government and whether there's enough money to be paid with labor as a 10 tells you the state of the budget.
Now, I mean, the insider story that we
Yeah.
are actually learning is that Labour definitely didn't go to this negotiation table demanding for 10%. They went with a higher demand. But this is the first time that, I mean, maybe not the first time, but this is the first time in a long time that I am seeing a sitting president actually taking part in such negotiations. So if you go to the negotiation table and you see a big weight like the president himself present, he just didn't send his employment or labor minister to come and negotiate with you. He himself was there to open the kitty or the pot for you to see that this is the quantum of food left in the pot. I mean, we know you want more, but we cannot dish everything out to you, because if we do so, other parts of the economy will struggle. Many have said that the presence of the president actually helped the government to arrive at that percent increment in both minimum wage and base pay. Remember that what we are talking about is not just minimum wage, but also base pay as well. And what we are learning is that the president's presence, and we just played that tape for you to see how he was able to speak to the minds of the big guys who were at the negotiation table, telling them that, look, we know things are not better, but we also can't say that because of that we are giving you nothing. So take 10% for now, and when things begin to get better, we definitely will decide to pay you more. Now, I mean, if you look at over the years, the percentage change hasn't really been so high like we saw. I'm talking about minimum wage.
Yes.
When you talk about base pay, it's a bit different. Sometimes around 7%. We've even had 4% before.
Yeah.
It was in 2024 again that, I mean, we saw the 23% for the first half of the year, and then 2024 first half of the year, and 25% second half of the year. Then we saw the COLA being introduced at a certain point before 2023 or so.
2023 there.
Exactly. Now, you can see how minimum wage has been going up. The average has been around 10 to 11%. So definitely, the president was aware that what he and Labour were agreeing to was actually within the domain or the range, the accepted, range. Just look at it. The highest between 2023 and 2013 has been 17% and 15%. But if you strike the average, you definitely will get somewhere around 10 to 11%.
Absolutely.
Which means that the president was within the acceptable zone, Winston.
This is interesting, going into possibly looking at the point of negotiation, just like you mentioned. When a figure as a president comes to you, it tells you that before the election, the kind of messages he met Labour for, putting down his policy, what he intends to do. Now, facing the reality of the current dispensation where he's sitting as the current president, looking at the financial outlook of the country, looking at the kind of policy he intends to champion this year in order to win the voice, the industry, the business, the investors, there have to be some adjustment in key aspects of the economy. Whether the government has the ability or the capacity to meet Labour's demand in the year, let's not forget, Labour has a lot of arms. One arm of Labour can decide to go on strike because of certain agreement, although have been pre-met by government. There may be certain demands in certain already discussed areas already, but this are something that will come up. The budget component, that is compensation component, or the Labour component of the budget, if you look at World Bank's recent Ghana Outlook report, it tells you that that is a major challenge in every budget, because government can budget, let's say, 50 billion for a year. Labour will constantly demand more than what has been budgeted for. So if you read the statement, World Bank stated that always the government overruns its Labour targets. And that has been consistent year by year. Even projection is that hopefully this year is going to do that by about 19%. But as to whether they'll be able to stick to how to handle the Labour front is what we are beginning to see.
Well, I mean, based on what you just said, I just took a quick glance at this chart that we have on the smart one. What I am realizing, you made mention of election years. But usually after elections and you have a fresh government, Labour seem to be always very, very cool. When it's your first year, they are all nice, they will speak to you and all that. When you bring something to the table and you tell them that, look, we cannot pay, they possibly will agree. But after your first year, then sometimes they begin to, in quotes, show you pepper. So what I have realized is that just look at, let's take 2016, for instance.
Yes.
2016 was an election year. Now, 2017 was when President Akufo-Addo was sworn into office. Just look at it. The previous year, the minimum wage had gone up by more than 10%. But when President Akufo-Addo took office, he offered 10%, decreasing from what was existing, somewhere around, let's say, 15%, right? Reducing from 15% to 10% in his first year. He was able to keep Labour from 2017 to 2020. I mean, the rate was almost the same. Why? Because this was a period where Ghana started enjoying single-digit inflation. So, I mean, your disposable income was a bit stable. Why must you go and be telling government that you needed more when inflation is down, depreciation wasn't that high? So that was good for government, and they got the breathing space in their first term. Remember that around that time too, we had the IMF in town. We're almost rounding up the 980 million IMF program. Then in 2020, we had another election. In 2020, the election year, government had offered 11%. Then in its first year, you see another reduction from 11% to 6%. So it means that it is not something new. In almost all the first years of the president, of every government, they tend to bring down the rate at which they increase minimum wage. And it's not a surprise that, look, this 22% came down to 10%, which is consistent with what
every election
President Akufo-Addo agreed in his first year in 2017. So this is an interesting story. And the story behind the 10% that we are seeing, the reason why Labour is not making so much noise about this 10% is because they always temper justice with mercy in the first year of every government. It will be interesting to see how Labour what labor will demand in the following years, especially when looking at the projections. This is the compensation of employees projections from 2024. We are done with this, and that's why it's in black. But from this year to 2028, until the president is done with his tenure, this is the projected budget that government wants to pay to workers.
The big picture you see behind me right here is 105.7 billion Ghana cedis for 2028. The future looks awesome for the labor. So if you're working in the public sector, you should know your future by now in terms of what you'll be demanding. Your labor union, organized or disorganized, will be negotiating for you going forward. Now in 2026, 82.7 billion. That is what labor is projected to be earning. In 2027, 93.4. But this year, government will have to work with 73.1 billion. These are data factually examined and hoping that certainly it will fall within this margin going into the rest of the year. One thing we should realize is that when it comes to speaking about labor salary, compensation is critical, especially the allowance aspect of it. You realize always labor is pushing for allowance. They don't normally go strong on the base pay because allowances seems to be quite chunk.
Most of them are untaxable.
Exactly.
Right?
Until the recent issue came up where one MD package came out in the media, everyone was like, wow, is he always taking this way? You know, so it kept a positive picture or gave an idea of how much people really receive, especially if you're working for government. So that tells you how juicy it is. If you look at the literature, it tells you that government literally employs high level of competent individuals in the government agency. If you look at the literacy rates, especially the tertiary level going upwards, a lot of them are working in the civil service because they realize that based on the single spine salary structure, the higher you go in your academics, the better you earn. So the packages go with that reflection. And that tells you that indeed government's position of seeing incremental demand on the labor front. Every year, about 84% of the output in our labor force, 43% goes into working for government because of how juicy it is. Report has stipulated that government is the better employer in this country compared to working for the private sector.
Well, it is interesting that you're churning out this fact. And another fact is that the reason why we are seeing the 10% labor acceptance is because of this threshold that government would have to be working with. This is a projection not from government itself, not from anybody, but between government and the IMF. We picked this data from the IMF document, and the projection is that this year, your compensation of employees, which usually includes wages and salaries that government will pay to workers, plus their social contributions, should be somewhere around 73 billion Ghana cedis, and going forward, it should increase. You spoke about the nominal figures, and you said that labor should be expecting, a good year ahead. But I mean, if you strike it and get the percentage change, possibly labor might not like this. I mean, they just look at this: 2025 to 2028. If you look at the compensation of employees,
that is all
budget,
factors taken into consideration. Being equal.
If you look at the projections so far, the expectation was that this year, the compensation of employees' budget, if you compare 2022 to 2023, it should grow by some 14.8%. Government has managed to reach a 10% agreement with labor. Good, maybe falls within the range, but 2026, 2027, 2028, we can see the rate of change falling from 14.8 to 13.1 to 12.9 and then to 13.2%, which means that labor should possibly not be expecting more because the IMF program will end somewhere 2026, right? And the IMF expect that once they are no more in the picture, government should be able to tighten their belt so that inflation doesn't go up. We will tell you the reason why the fund did come out with this projection and not expecting so much, because they are projecting something positive on inflation. But Winston, I want to take your thoughts on this. this is the projection, how the compensation of employees' budget is supposed to grow. Do you still think that things will get better and possibly Labour might get some 22% increment in base pay again?
The adjustment is all round. If you listen to the president's statement, he says that he's instructed the finance minister to ensure the expenditure cuts, even if it involves his management, should be done as well. So if you look at this, basically it tells you that there will be serious adjustment going forward. Either there will be rationalization of our salary structure, especially for government, or either there will be a change in terms of how many individuals are needed in some agency. Because if you look at the output and the policies the government intends to put in place, there's a lot of work that has to be done. So it's a lot of work, basically, from where I sit. And I see these projections coming to reality, basically because it appears the numbers will be there. Labour will always be Labour, because looking at over the years, how they've put pressure on government. The first place, somewhere last year, when the issue of Galamsey came into light, Labour had the biggest opportunity in over a decade, where every year they keep fighting for themselves for a particular salary or demands or condition of service. But it came to a point where they have to fight for the individual citizens by literally putting the president on his toe, especially on the demand by some section of citizens to deal with Galamsey. So for the second time also, you see President himself sitting down with Labour. It tells you how every president has ear for Labour. So the Labour's position in any economy is critical. No government can function effectively or efficiently without Labour's support. And now we've got to realize that government's Labour source is competent, but efficiency is the issue. Whether we have an efficient Labour front, we've always said that we want to hit a certain level of growth. It's a sensitive issue, you know? Yes, a certain level of growth. We always want to see a certain level of progress. But when we talk about corruption, one tag or perception is that it's quite high in the civil service and some aspect of government agency, because it's individuals that run the government. But there's a lot of work that has to be done as well. But let's move to a very interesting slide that tells us where we are going. Is it feasible?
Well, I mean, Winston, before we even go to our last slide, I think that if you were president and about 35% of your annual budget or your revenue projection goes to the payment to a certain group of people, it explains why Labour is so important and why any government cannot just come out with their budget without negotiating with Labour. Usually, you would have to negotiate with Labour around, let's say, September or August. But this time around, the reason why we are seeing negotiations take place in February is because there's a change in government. And for whenever that happens, it means that the main budget would have to be read somewhere in March, right? And Labour is actually expecting that once they've been able to reach an agreement with a government, this will reflect in the budgetary allocation. But before government even accepts anything that comes to the table, Labour will always go to the table looking at two things. The money that government wants to give them. What is the purchasing power of that money? And I'm sure that there is this data that government possibly has shown to government, maybe why the president is so confident, giving Labour the assurance that, look, things might get better and we'll meet you halfway.
But you know, you just brought my mind to something. I'll not be surprised, because Labour is Labour and they are connected based on their unionized nature from every agency. Therefore, they are actually aware of how much is in the packet of government stock. So I'll not be surprised. So if the government says we don't have money, they'll come and present, we are the laborers, we know how much you are making.
Of course, so we make the money.
We make the money. So let us know how much you can pay us out of what we develop for you as a nation. So,
exactly. I mean, this is Labour's hope and government's hope as well. That this projection from the IMF that by the end of this year, annual inflation should be around 11%. And by next year, we should be hitting single-digit inflation, where inflation is supposed to stay within the 8% plus or minus zone from 2025 till Mahama is done with his tenure. This is a projection. It could be that, look, and we all know that when the cities start to misbehave, this will no longer be any projection that nobody will be looking at. And when the city begins to misbehave, fuel prices will go up. When fuel prices goes up, transfer fares will go up, and cost of products will also go up, and labor will definitely hold your neck and will not demand 10%, but they'll come to the negotiation table with somewhere above 60%. They always start around that zone, and you would always have to fight to bring it down. This is the hope that government has, and this is the hope that labor also has as well, going into next year and even this year, that inflation should stay down for their disposable incomes to have weight, Winston.
So talking about reset, the reset must begin with inflation. The food prices go up. They have never come down in this economy. We are hoping that the government will begin to work on the food inflation consistently if there are hopes to ensure the conditions of service. The cost of living in the country is at an appreciable level. That means you, I, and everyone in any way, in any capacity that we contribute to the national development, the work is on to us, including government making the right policy and making business conducive enough to operate. So this is today's edition of Beyond the Numbers. Make sure you meet us same time on Wednesday at 2 p.m.
Yeah,
yes?
Wednesday, 2 p.m.
Wednesday, 2 p.m. will bring you exactly comprehensive analysis here as well. My name is Winston Taki, and the chairman of the chairman himself.
It's Isaac Ofeja. I'm not the chairman. He's the chairman, actually. So if Labour wants to speak to anybody,